So, Simonetta, we've had these interesting conversations about product leadership in the future, where it's headed. I think we both believe there is this convergence of factors that is going to materially change what it takes to be a good leader. That's super clear to me. And one of the things we're both passionate about in talking about leadership in the future is like what I'm going to call real diversity instead of, diversity theater, which I think there's been some of anyway. I'm curious, in terms of thinking about product leadership going forward, what does diversity mean to you in that context?
Yeah, so I've always been curious about what makes a great team, right? Like, how do you create a high-performing team? How do you create great outcomes? How do you create great products, right? And I started looking into the drivers of these kinds of things and came across the research of Amy Edmondson that surfaced that the main predictor of a high-performing team is psychological safety. So I was like, okay, great. How do you create that? What is at the core of psychological safety? And at the core of psychological safety is it's the topic of trust, right? Like, you are allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to help each other. You don't believe that someone else is sabotaging you. You don't believe that someone else is more important than you. There's this diversity of perspectives that creates good things together. And then you look into the research about innovation and you see the research coming out of, I think it was Linda Hill, who's the Dane, I'm not sure, it's Yale Business School, like one of these Ivy League business schools. And she did research on like what drives innovation. And it's like, she came up with this concept of like a healthy way to disagree around perspectives and figure out like how to look at things from multiple different angles to come to a new fresh idea, to a new cool thing. And it's like, okay, so what does this mean? Like all these different angles, right? But, in a product team, we've always had the engineering perspective, the product perspective, the QA perspective, other stakeholders' perspectives. That's a diversity of perspectives. But it's also about who are the people in this team? Like, are the voices of women carrying the same weight as the voices of men? Are the voices of the immigrant in the team carrying the same weight as the voice of the native speaker in the team? What does language barrier do? Does someone who's a native speaker think that somebody who doesn't speak English quite fluently, are they perceived to be as intelligent, as good to contribute towards the joint success? Like, there's all these biases at play at the same time that undermine trust, right? Because from the perspective of the person who's not being heard equally, it's very hard to trust the rest of the team fully, that you're allowed to make the same mistakes, that you're allowed to take risks and things like that. So there's like all these layers to this seemingly so simple psychological safety topic. And I think we started talking then about, okay, what does this mean going forward in a world that's getting more and more volatile? I just look at the election results from this week, right? It makes me mad and angry and sad and all these things, right? And it's kind of like the opposite of a leader who's looking at diversity as an asset, yet he gets elected to be president of the United States, right? But I just kind of wonder, you see all the research from all these companies that is like telling you the exact opposite of what creates great outcomes, right? And it's like, these companies aren't crazy, right? Like, you look at an Amazon and their leadership development programs, that does center humility, that does center perspective taking, that does center diversity in the way they think about innovation, in the way they think about leadership, right? So I really think those topics are not like nice to have fringe concepts. They are at the core of building high performing teams. And I sometimes get frustrated with people who kind of just put this in the, oh, this is like the crazy soft coaches corner. No, this is like a strategic asset if you want to lead a team well. And I think this is how we kind of started talking, is like, what is actually at odds with this? And how do people from very different perspectives hear each other out and learn from each other and have this dialogue in a way that it doesn't get to a place of I'm right or you're right, saying no, like we both have some valuable perspective here, and what can we learn from each other? How can we build on each other's perspectives? And how can we make something cool out of the things that, even as in traditional business, have come up as well-working concepts, like making a strategy, looking at the financials the right way, right? But then from other perspectives, like how can you build trust? How can you build diversity as an asset? How can you listen well in a team? How can you create a culture that allows you to fail and learn from the mistakes and iterate fast and all these things? So it's like, I think a lot of things are coming together in this day and age. And for leaders to be successful into the future with so much change around, you have to lean into the team and hear what other people are saying so that you can create cool stuff together, because none of us has all the answers anymore. It's impossible to know all these fields at expert level. So you have to have a team of smart people around you that co-creates with you. And I really, truly believe that this is at the core of great success in product teams.
Yeah. And what I'm reflecting on is, I've been around a long time in professional circles for a long time. In the United States, diversity is a very sensitive topic because it has been, I think most people know the history. So there's been, I think, this push to include diversity because it is the right thing to do, or even the legal thing to do. And what I read into what you're saying, and this is my personal belief, is that it's a very practical thing to do with maybe soft ROI. I mean, I don't know, you can calculate if I have this level of diversity, although some people have probably done that. And what occurred to me is, for leaders right now, there is an opportunity to be one of the first movers to really think about how diversity can drive results. To finish the thought before, in the States, I think there is this tension around hiring somebody for their knowledge and experience, and, hiring somebody because they have a diverse viewpoint can be viewed as like this, like artificial hand tipping the scale, like an undesirable thing, that you really should just hire the person who is best at doing the job. And I think we're moving to a place that says, well, we take a lot of things into consideration when we hire somebody. It's not just their skill and experience. We see if they're a cultural fit with our company, those kinds of things. So now maybe we're getting to a point where we can make a business case to say, I've got two candidates that are very similar, but one of them is going to bring a diverse viewpoint to this team. So that's the direction I'm going.
And to build on what you just said, like, if somebody has run the numbers, if somebody made the business case, yes, McKinsey did. And they came out with diverse leadership teams are 62% more successful in the financial outcomes. So the money argument is there, right? So yeah, I think you're spot on with the opportunity, right? Like, it's not this fluffy, nice to have, well, we're going through the motions, it looks good on the ESG report kind of a thing. No, this is like a hard business decision. If you fail to look at this as a strategic asset, as a way to ensure the future success of your company, you're just failing to look at a success factor. And that's what's puzzling me, right? I think, and I honestly think, like, a lot of this divisive rhetoric around this topic and the way of like us versus them, and also in some ways the unhelpful defensive reaction of, quite frankly, white men on the topic, right, has created, or has kind of tried to put this in a corner of, oh, this is like the crazy women asking for more than they deserve. They're out for us. They want an unfair share or something like this. It's just crazy, if you ask me. It's like, none of the women want an unfair share. It's also not a us versus them. If we can figure out the way how we can have a constructive, good, respectful dialogue, we can learn a ton from each other. And that's what actually creates great teams, right? It's like, the research on all of this is pretty clear. It's there, right? The research on the business case is there. The research on how this topic of diversity and psychological safety and trust all relates is there. It's not it's not unknown, but it is going against some of the systemic learned behaviors we all grew up with, right? And you and I had a bit of a conversation about what it was like for you to grow up in your world as a young white boy, where you might want to tell the story yourself, right? Like how people around you in your surrounding and your family just held beliefs that you no longer hold, but it was just kind of normal, right? And you had to unlearn a lot of stuff to get to the place where you are today. And I think that this is a learning journey we're all on. And it
Yeah, I think
doesn't
that's
mean that I need to like disrespect you for being an old white dude, which you happen to be, right? But no, it's like I can approach you with curiosity and we can kind of have deep, meaningful conversations and learn from each other and create something cool together.
yeah. So I think just like, you know, we need to look at this diversity topic as something that is practically valuable. I think we shouldn't forget the ethical, moral part of it as well. But I think people who are fighting for better diversity and those that have been discriminated against need to realize that they won't solve the problem by themselves anytime soon, that it takes everybody, and that we have to have a bit of understanding and compassion for each other. And I think it's very hard for people that are maybe 20 or 30 years younger than I am to understand what it was. I grew up in the middle of the United States in a very kind of agricultural environment. And yeah, you know, these things get embedded almost into your brainstem before you're old enough to really think about them. And I consider myself, where I grew up, pretty lucky. But there was, in my childhood, just really open, pervasive racism, for sure. I grew up in an area that had almost no, what we would today call minorities, certainly very few Black people. So there was very open racism, and the role of women. I mean, I tell the story that in the 70s, my mom got divorced, couldn't get a credit card because your husband had to sign for a woman to get a credit card. So that's not an excuse to act poorly. Like, we have an obligation to be aware of what we're doing, but a little understanding goes a long way. And I think we, by the way, have to remember that all of us will be judged at some point as having a limited, people in 100 years will look back at the things we tolerated, the things we say, and judge us like we're judging each other, kind of a thing. I believe. So there is a tendency when you see the value of these things to get frustrated and look down on people who look at things differently. That's natural. But if we're going to make progress, we have to overcome it and try to have some understanding on both sides. And for, probably on both sides, it's going to require some unlearning, which is very difficult to do. To unlearn things, to say, okay, what do we do now going forward? We're probably not going to right all the wrongs that happened in the past. What do we do going forward? How do we move forward together? So, I have no idea what to think. I hope we are in a position that we can, A, raise awareness, but second, I think a legitimate question is, okay, I buy the argument on moral grounds, on practical grounds, that having a diverse team is a good thing. Now, what do I do? What if the rest of the org doesn't see it that way? What if HR doesn't see it that way? Let's say they do see it that way. Specifically, what do I do to, in a fair way, create this diversity of opinion? I do not have like a crisp answer to that question. I think that has to be explored, right? I have some ideas, but not sure. I can't speak with any authority there, I don't think.
I have ideas. I've tried stuff and I've done stuff. Like, I think the first thing is to just actually be clear that this is what you want and be sincere about it, right? Like, if you actually care about this topic, you will start exploring, you will start making it happen, setting this intention. And it really helps if the intention is set from the very top level of the organization, clearly said, this is a priority for us, we want to figure this out. Because then incentive structures can kind of fall into place, right? Like, I was very clear, for example, that I wanted to hire a diverse set of software engineers in the gender dimension at a very minimum, right? And my HR recruiting team wasn't incentivized to surface a lot of female candidates because that's more work. They were incentivized to close recruiting positions fast, right? That was how they got their bonus. That's not a helpful incentive structure if you actually do care about diversity, right? What can you practically do? You can tell your recruiters that you do want to see a 50% candidate pool, right? That is more work for them, right? But it's a very practical thing you can tell them to do. And then you can still pick on merit, right? You can still say this woman or this man seems to be the best person for this job. You can include the diversity perspective in the stack. You can look at your team and say, we have 6 men, no women yet. It's like we need to change the dynamic over time. We are going to teach this woman, even if she is lacking 5% of skill set here. You can be aware that women tend to not apply for positions until they have like 100% of the required skills that are mentioned in the job ad, while most men say 70% is good enough. I'm going to raise my hand and apply. So you can, for example, also in your organization, go around and encourage women to raise their hand for a promotion, even if they don't feel quite ready yet, trusting that you can develop them there, that the guys around them have no hesitation to say, look, I want this role right now. So just be supportive for the women around you or the minorities around you, right? This is not just about gender. This is also about color of skin. This is about like your sexual orientation. This is about the countries you are from, and be mindful also like what your product needs, right? You're building, let's say you build a product that's targeting women, right? Like you would want to have female perspectives in the product team making decisions for people they understand intimately well because they're also women, right? So if you have a global product that's serving a global customer base, like take a Spotify, right? Take an Amazon, they have clients around the world. They would want to have a perspective of people from different cultures, from different countries on specific products. So they don't inadvertently make things that are culturally offensive to half the world's population just because the people making the decision don't come from this part of the world, for example, right? So it's just like, I think it's not that hard to start thinking about what this means. You can include your team in the brainstorm as well, right? If you already have people on the team who are not part of the majority group that's naturally around, right? Like you can ask them, what do you see? What should we do more of? And believe them, whatever they say, they usually have great ideas, right? I think we're all in this together. And I want to challenge one thing you said on the sides, right? The sides implies there is two sides of the coin, right? I want to like look at this more as an interconnected web of us all together. We're really literally all in one boat together. There's not two sides to this. There's us together in this somehow. And I don't have the metaphor for it either, but I think more of it as an interconnected web, not with sides, but with many different angles.
Yeah, and I think that's the right way to look at it. I think a lot of people see sides. So if we think about this valuing diversity, we can think of a spectrum. And there are definitely people on, as always, right, opposite sides of the spectrum. And it's an interesting way to think of it because I think that gets a lot of the press, that gets a lot of the mind share. And there is this middle. There are things happening. There are positive things happening. But what I take away from this conversation that I think is super relevant is, and this always makes me feel funny, but really these kinds of changes will not happen without the active engagement of leadership. So everybody can do something and should do things and should advocate and should behave in a way that creates diversity. All these things, we should value diversity. But per your example, people do what they're incented to do. And if there are counter incentives to doing something a lot of people don't want to do anyway, and there's not the space, the psychological safety to bring this up to, quick tangent, like I've been in so many conference rooms where I see a company's values on the wall. And it's very convenient to say that we value diversity. But if you ask, what are you doing to become diverse? I think responses are really unsatisfying. So anyway, we should probably wrap this up. I really, at some point, want to dive into this idea of psychological safety. I think that's critical. But this is very much a practical leadership topic. And I am looking forward to doing more research, hearing from more people, and trying to give some meaningful guidance to people who want to do the right thing, but aren't sure, specifically what to do. And I think that's a lot of people.
Yeah. And you and me together, right? Like how to get more people skilled at this kind of conversation and skilled at actually creating change. That's what will create change, that will create better teams, that will create more psychological safety, that will in the end create better business outcomes, right? So I'm actually really excited about this topic, and look forward to keep exploring this with you.
Yeah, so we will post this recording. We'll see what happens. But if folks are listening, super curious to hear diverse perspectives on this. Looking forward to people chiming in. And until this will not be the last session.
Sweet. Looking forward to it.